All right, guys, thanks for joining me. Appreciate you as always. Got some familiar faces in the audience and some new guests as well. So I hope you enjoy what we're going to do today. Over on the left, you'll see a Q&A. Feel free to type in any questions as they come up. I'll try to address them in the webinar, but if I don't, I will get to them after and do a full Q&A afterwards. So if you want to participate in that, of course, feel free to type your questions in there. I do respond anonymously. So if you want to ask questions about your particular firm, feel free to do so. So that's me, guys. My name is Brian Hahn. I'm the founder at mTradecraft. I have a history in financial IT operations, ranging from managing trade desk for hedge funds to doing CS analytics work for Ray Dalio. I've also been the chief compliance officer and director of operations for an SEC registered RIA, where I did a lot of major IT work. Cybersecurity and fintech and financial assets have always been a part of my career. And so now companies hire me and my firm to come in and basically twofold the situation and make sure, one, that their client data and their firm data is secure, and two, make sure that they can respond to an audit or an examination request if that comes in at any point. So I don't sell any ongoing IT services or anything like that. So I work purely as a consultant to these firms. At the end of our engagements, there's never a sales pitch or anything like that. We simply work to make sure they're secure and can answer their SEC or state board or FINRA compliance, cybersecurity compliance regulations. So you guys, I want to take you a little bit into my world today and what I do on a daily basis, and whether it's performing a penetration test or a vulnerability scan or a compliance review for a firm. Essentially what we're trying to do is hack them and find vulnerabilities before others do. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to demo, how I approach that and how I go through and find vulnerabilities, in the networks of hedge funds and RIAs and show where those are and show you some real world examples. And the whole reason we do that is because we want to mimic the real world and make sure that we're protecting from the real threats out there. Government-sponsored hackers, while that used to not be a threat to a lot of you, I'm going to talk in a second about why that is a threat now. Organized crime, hacktivist, insider threats, whether that's internal user errors or malicious insider, opportunistic hackers and script kiddies. And we're going to touch a little bit on all of these today and show some of the techniques of how they pivot through your network and ultimately profit from it. And I mentioned government-sponsored hackers, and it used to be back in the day, people say, oh, we're not doing anything illegal. I don't really care if the CIA or the NSA hacks me. Well, the problem is that the tools that the NSA uses are now in the hands of people like me, and I use them to go through and perform these penetration tests. So, in the world of cyber warfare, we had a group called the Shadow Brokers, which hacked the NSA's equation group, or what's known as TAO, Tailored Access Operations. This was the group that Edward Snowden was a part of, and basically stole all their backdoors into different systems, whether it's a Linux system or Solaris or whatever the case may be. They stole all their backdoors and published them. And so, while government-sponsored threats might not be, from a government entity in your firm, the same extremely powerful tools that they use are now available to not only people like me, but also malicious hackers as well. So the idea is that the threat's real, right? We want to go out there and mimic these attackers and figure out how they're going to get in so that we can help our client protect themselves from that. So most attacks, whether it's a ethical hack such as what we do or a malicious hack, generally follow 7 stages. First is kind of the information gathering, or what we call OSINT, which stands for open source intelligence. We're going to cover that pretty extensively today and talk about how hackers go through and figure out what systems are there and what vulnerabilities may be there through target discovery. We're then going to do some vulnerability mapping so that once we find targets, we can figure out what vulnerabilities might exist on those targets. And if we fail at that, if we can't find targets, if we can't find vulnerability, I'm going to show you how social engineering, or what you might know as spear phishing, takes place. I'm going to show you how that happens. Then there's target exploitation. I'm going to kind of bump a little bit over that. We'll touch that a little bit today. Privilege escalation and pivoting and attacking. So we'll cover all of these today. But again, whether I'm doing a penetration test or this is a real world hack, they generally go through very similar stages. When I start a penetration test, I don't know what my end game is. I don't know what I'm going to report in the end, in regards to how I got into the network or what damage I was able to do. I generally focus around 6 different things, and I think most malicious hackers do too. For one, I want to look at business email compromise. Can I get into your email system and read your emails? Can I send emails as you? Can I, just quietly watch? I'm going to look for ID theft. That's really big now that we've, several years back, we had the KYC regulations come down. So now you guys are naturally collecting a lot of data about your clients, which is very useful for hackers. We're going to look at ransomware. Ransomware is extremely profitable. It's very hard to defend against, and even the SEC and the OC office are out warning against it now, is especially with the work from home environment, as they see these type of attacks step up. I see, looks like I got a few financial planners on here. I know a lot of financial planners collect credit card information. And if you're doing that in a way and you're storing data, then, perhaps you have some credit card data there that could be stolen. There's click fraud. I actually just got done doing a meeting here, a presentation of my findings, which they had a ton of click fraud. And this can be very problematic. For instance, even if you don't have custody or you don't have private client data on your website, say you are a planner and you put a link to Fidelity or Schwab or whoever on your website, if it's susceptible to click fraud, I can take over your website, and you may have a client come on who thinks that they are clicking through to Fidelity when they're actually clicking through to a fraudulent website that I've created and entering their Fidelity credentials. And so even though that particular hack doesn't go at the advisor, it does, of course, go after the advisor's clients. And then, of course, they're stealing money, right? I always tell my clients and people that I'm talking to that ultimately you can classify hacks in 2 different categories. One is when data goes missing. And chances are you will never know when that happens. If the hacker is halfway decent, he's going to be very stealthy. He's going to pivot through your network. You'll find that most intrusion detection systems, intrusion protection systems, actually do very little against a targeted attack. So we're going to look at stealing money, and that's the other category that the hacks can dive into, because when money goes missing, you're going to know it's going to hurt, and more than likely it's going to be the end of your business. So that's what we really want to focus on and make sure that that type of situation isn't out there. So let's set the stage of what we're looking at. This is represented, this map is built to be representative of a typical financial advisor office. They may have an office location, which is represented by this intranet. There's laptops, there's workstations, maybe there's a print server or an application server. There might be data backup storage or a file server. All of these devices connect through the internet, generally through some switches, some routers, some firewalls, some intrusion detection systems that sit in front of it. There may be a DMZ zone that contains things like email servers or web servers or SQL databases. And especially right now, there's a lot of remote offices. And, the remote offices may consist of a laptop or a desktop sitting behind a switch, which is, also behind a router and a firewall and connected to the internet. So when I do a penetration test, and you know, if a unethical hacker is coming after your firm, they're generally going to start right here at this laptop. They're going to attempt to pivot through the internet to get access to these different systems. You know, they're going to start by building maps of your domain, which we're going to talk about in a minute. From that, they can tell what systems, these firewalls, you know, what system is your router using, and then scan those for vulnerabilities, looking for a way to ultimately pivot in to these networks via the internet, or what we call control and command servers. If that fails, social engineering is always an option. That's where I trick one of your employees into clicking on a link in an email, which will ultimately give me access to this intranet, and at which point that becomes an internal penetration test where I'm going through, once I'm in, I can then pivot and go and test all these other different systems for vulnerabilities and see what I may be able to exploit. And that's what we call pivoting or escalation. So when I start information gathering, which is the first stage, there's generally about 5 key pieces of information I want to know. I want to know what systems you're using. I want to know what usernames you're using, what passwords you're using. I want to know what IP addresses your devices are located at, and I want to know who your key employees are. So that's when we begin intelligence gathering, and I go out and find these different things. And so I have 5 different services that I want to show you. Actually 4. I couldn't get my Maltego server to come up, but I will show you that in a minute. And hopefully it'll come up here in the background in the meantime. But when I start an engagement, the first thing I do, let me back out of this, is I go to a system called Predictiveops, which of course isn't popping up. So let's see if I can get this to come up. Oh, of course, lifetime failure there. Anyway, I can talk you through it. Predictiveops is a database that they ultimately take all of the Form ADV data, which, if you're not familiar with the compliance, every firm that's registered with a state board or with the SEC files a Form ADV, which discloses quite a bit of information about your firm, who your custodians are, who your chief compliance officers are, who your key holders are, all of this valuable information. So I'll go to a website like Predictiveops, and hopefully it'll load here in the background, but if not, I definitely hope you'll check it out here in the future when it pops up. And Predictiveops takes that Form ADV data and very easily makes it searchable so that I can find who your chief compliance officer is. You know, I want to know that because chief compliance officers generally have a fair amount of access to data, just kind of given their, you know, their credentials and what they are in the IT system. So that's a person I generally want to go after. I'm going to look for individuals that are in IT. I'm going to look for CEOs. I'm going to look for individuals that have access to all the different systems. And that starts with something like Predictiveops, or even going to the SEC website directly and pulling the Form ADV data. And so, you know, that's one of the big problems about being in a regulated industry like you guys are, is there's so much private, you know, detailed information about your firms that you have to give out and that the SEC publicly discloses for you guys. And so, you know, that can be an issue. One of the other services that I run is a program called the Harvester, and this is a Python script. Up here at the top, I gave it a quick command. I told the Harvester to go search LinkedIn, Google, Bing, and DuckDuckGo for any email address that had lpl.com in it. And I'm just picking on lpl.com because, you know, they're all over the place. It's pretty easy to find data on them. And so what the Harvester does is it goes through and it runs all kinds of different searches. It's going to pull people off of LinkedIn. It's going to find email addresses for me. And it's going to find host for me. So as you can see now, I've already located some usernames, which I have up here. I now have some IP addresses, which are all the different systems that LPL is using. You know, so when I'm looking at this, like tradedirect.lpl.com, that looks interesting. investor.lpl.com. That looks interesting. So these are all going to be targets that I'm going to start going after as I start putting this information together. I'm also going to take usernames and I'm going to go to the dark web and I'm going to start doing dark web searches. So this is a website called the PWNDB, or the Pwn database, which is a hacker terminology for basically saying that, you know, something's been breached and it's been published. So a lot of times this can happen. LinkedIn had a big breach. In fact, if you are a member of LinkedIn, there's a great chance that your credentials and passwords are just floating out there for anyone to use. So what I do is I come to a service like PWNDB, which is absolutely free. There's tons of other services out there just like it. And I run a quick query and say, show me all of the usernames and passwords that have been involved in a past breach that have LPL.com in them. And as you can see, it returns a ton of information. It gives me the username, it gives me the domain, and it gives me the password that they are using. This is very, very important when you are doing a penetration test. This makes your job so much easier. And this is why password hygiene is so important, that you don't reuse passwords and that you use complicated passwords. You can bet I'm going to go through here and find the guy that's got password 123, and that's my guy, because I know he's going to click on anything I send him in an email. So this is why proper password hygiene is very important. And ultimately, what I end up building is something that looks like this. And this is how I start organizing information about a firm so that I know once I find a system, how I'm going to get in. This is what we call a dark web map. Up at the top, I just pulled a couple sample LPL email addresses at the top. Here in the middle, I listed all of the different breaches that I found information about these email addresses in, and then I give a little synopsis of the breach and what happens. These are all documents I create for my clients that I'm showing you examples of. And then down at the bottom, I map what information I was able to get from those particular breaches. So as you can see here, you know, if I was mapping this company to do a penetration test, I've got password hints, I've got usernames, I've got passwords, I've got IP addresses, I've got email addresses. I've probably got some credit reports in here, dates of birth. I mean, just everything you could imagine to go through and, you know, try to brute force my way into these accounts. So I build this using a program called Maltego, and I also build a domain map. And so, you know, if you think about the map with the usernames and passwords, that contains, you know, IP addresses, usernames, and passwords. This is going to be more systems. So just as an example here, I did my company and started mapping out a lot of the different information about my external domain. And so this document right here really has two purposes. One, it helps me as a penetration tester kind of map out where am I going to send my attacks, you know, what systems am I going after? And then it's also a compliance document. So we're going to talk a little bit at the end about the actual cybersecurity documentation that the SEC requests. And this is one of them. They oftentimes want to see external and internal domain maps. And I'll show you an example of an internal domain map in a little bit. But these are domain maps that, you know, whether you hear the SEC talk about them or you've seen them in my past webinar, this is what they look like. And this just maps all of the IT that's connected to your network and running. Let me get back to the slideshow there. Where'd it go? So once I find your IP address, the next thing I'm going to do is start testing it for remote code execution vulnerabilities. And I use a program called RouterSploit, which I can show you what that looks like real quick here. Let's see, CD RouterSploit. This is also a Python Python code here. Oh, let's see, where is it? I think I got the code wrong here to go in. I'm not going to waste too much time here, but I was hoping I could get it up and going for you guys. There we go. Show you a little bit about router split looks like. And this is what you call an automated framework. So I can basically come in here and say, hey, show me the different scanners that you have, and pull up a particular scanner. And so I can say, use scanners on a phone. And then I set the target to, your IP address, whatever that may be. And then click run. And this is automatically going to run through and start testing your system for all kinds of different vulnerabilities. And, once I find one, as you can see here, this is set up on my internal kind of testing network. It found an RCE vulnerability, which is a remote code execution that's going to let me get into a camera system, which is what I have running on this network here. And so once I find some remote code execution, I'm going to go through and execute that to get into that particular device on there. And so that's, again, it's once you find the IP addresses, that's when you can go through and start looking for different exploits that are on that particular IP address. So, let's assume everyone in your firm is doing what they are supposed to, and every system is updated and patched, and there's nothing insecure about it. The next thing I'm going to do is move to a phishing attack. And so I want to show you what that looks like from an attacker's perspective. Pretty standard stuff is what's known as the social engineering toolkit. Let me zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little bit better. This is the social engineering toolkit, which is used to create phishing emails and to ultimately get people to click on a link and compromise an account. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of an example here a little bit later about a malicious PDF. But let's say that I did want to create a malicious PDF. I could come into a system like the social engineering toolkit. I select option 1 here. And let's say I want to do a spear phishing attack here. I want to create a file format payload. And it's going to give me a bunch of different file formats that I can create a payload in, so that when you open this particular document, some script is going to run and some code is going to run that will allow me to take over your system. One of my favorite to use is number 13 here, which is an Adobe PDF, because in our industry, everyone has been trained that PDF is safe and that it can't harm me, when actually quite the opposite is true. So I love to embed malicious code into PDFs and social engineer that way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and how I play that out when I'm doing a penetration test. And so you can see that, I think when you think about it, you would probably find yourself clicking on these particular emails as well. So, option 1 is what we call the spouse will be mad hack. Okay. This is, and we've seen this quite a bit. And this is just a particular example. It can certainly happen in other compromising situations as well. But ultimately, Ashley Madison was a website which promoted adultery, and they had a breach. And a lot of information was lost in that breach, including IP addresses and usernames. So what we found the hackers were doing was going in to that large breach database and searching for words like advisor or hedge or wealth, or some kind of keyword that would ultimately point to a work address or a corporate address. Because unfortunately, what happens when a lot of people are having an affair, they use their work email to handle that business, since their spouse might not have access to that email. So when you run these searches, you get a lot of hits, a lot of information bounces back. And then you use that for further social engineering. With Facebook, what it is, it's pretty easy to kind of triangulate and figure out that Bob Smith at ABC Wealth Management is married to Jane Smith at ABC Mortgage. And that's when you can start blackmailing people. The blackmail can range from anything of having someone click on a link through force, saying, hey, if you don't open this particular link, we're going to contact your wife, to trickery, where someone sends maybe a PDF or they send an infected JPEG and say, hey, Bob, we have photos. We know that you met Cynthia, whatever. And that's what we call the blackmail attack. And so this is, this is one of the least popular because it does take some human interaction and blackmailing, which most hackers are not the best at, but it does happen out there. Option 2 is what I call the excited advisor hack. And this is one I see all the time. So step 1, create a malicious PDF, which is what we just did. I'll generally, and sometimes when I'm doing, I'll even take a real, like a Fidelity brokerage account statement and embed a real statement with a malicious, with some malicious code. And then what you do is you send that to an advisor and you basically say something like, hey, I know I'm a small fish. I've only got $5 million. It's sitting at Schwab. I want to trade over to Fidelity. Could you take my account? Will you look at my allocations? Do I have too much risk? When an advisor, and think about this, when an advisor or firm thinks they have 5 million in new assets coming in, are you thinking about cybersecurity? Of course you're not. You're opening that document. You want to see how you can tear apart those allocations. You want to see, what can you do to sell your value and get them in? You're not thinking cybersecurity. You open up this brokerage PDF statement. If it's a real statement, it shows $5 million. Maybe you get excited and maybe that guy just disappears and you forget about him. But ultimately, you've clicked that PDF and he's now on your computer. So there's a lot of ways that social engineering attacks can take place. So whether we find a vulnerability in a router or, we social engineering, we're in, and it's time to continue the attack. One of the first things I do is I'll run a program called ZenMap. Again, this map kind of has two different, let me open up an example here. This map has two different purposes. For one, as a penetration tester, or even if you are the IT guy in your firm, this is awesome at managing everything that's on your network and knowing what is on that network. From a compliance standpoint, when the SEC or the state boards come in and they request to see the internal domain maps, or they request to see the IT checklist, the IT asset list, this is what you show them. So this is one of the tools we build for our clients that I think probably adds a lot of value. Whether they're hiring people or they're firing people, they can come into this, they can click scan, and it's going to recreate this list for them. So one of the most beautiful things it does is it creates this internal domain map. So on this particular example, here is the local host, which would be like the router, the Wi-Fi router, or whatever. And then all around the spokes are the different systems within this office that are connected to that. So that's going to be things like desktops, laptops, VoIP phones, scanners, printers, whatever, Alexas, Roombas. I've actually penetrated a network with a Roomba. These things are all going to be connected to that local host, and they're going to be mapped here. Also, with everything, we map what ports and what hosts are up and running on that. So you can see here at the internal IP address, and just kind of stepping back a little bit, if you're unfamiliar with networking, when your computer connects to the local router assigns it an internal IP address, which generally starts with 192.168. So that is the number that we use to identify the different assets on here. So over on the left, you can see the different systems that are connected. And then over here under ports and hosts, we map the different ports, states, and services that are running on that particular device. Now, as a penetration tester, I use this to go through and test each and every one for known vulnerabilities to see if this may be a vulnerable piece of software. And again, as for compliance purposes, it makes that compliance job of building an IT asset list and building that domain map super simple. I know a lot of people struggle with that FINRA checklist, which used to be awesome and really well organized. But this literally automates everything. It takes about 5 to 6 hours to run a full scan of a network and have it create this. You literally open up, press scan, and let it do its job. So, you know, if you hire someone or you fire someone or you add a new computer, you just open this up, you click scan, and it updates that information for you. So that's ZenMap. Again, this is that internal network mapping. I'll then take that internal network mapping and I'll use a program. Let me jump back over to this real quick. I will use a program like Nessus to go through and scan that network and scan those devices to look for known vulnerabilities. So if you are running Office 365 or Google G Suite, I'm often going to do a cloud audit to make sure that that system is set up secure. We're going to look for things like bad lock, shell shock, the Intel security bypass. We're going to look for drown vulnerabilities, Spectra, Meltdown, WannaCry, Shadow Brokers, which is the which is all the stolen files that I was talking about earlier that were stolen from the NSA. Essentially, this is a host of different scans that I'm going to go through and look for vulnerabilities. Again, just trying to identify different ways that I can get into your network and launch attacks or launch exploits to ultimately be able to compromise some information. Nessus is the only program I've showed you so far that's not 100% free. Nessus is a little expensive, but it's amazing at what it does. You know, for larger firms, it's definitely worth the cost to kind of to eat that and have it come through and build out all that documents for you and you know, scan for things like malware and really it's super powerful. Mobile devices, things like that. So after we've built that internal map and we've done the Nessus scans, we have a pretty good idea of what usernames are out there, what passwords are out there, what systems you're using, you know, where's your email server, where's your web server, do you have a client portal, are you using eMoney, are you using Bloomberg? You know, at this point, we're going to know all of that information just by, you know, going out and interrogating different pieces of servers to build that map and launch that attack. So attacks hurt, right? You know, again, we can map those into kind of two different categories. One is data goes missing. So many of you have had data go missing or be compromised and you don't even know it and you're never going to know it. You know, maybe because you're not checking logs or you're not checking, you know, any kind of intrusion protection systems or anything like that, but it's happened. And chances are you're probably not going to know it's happened. But there's definitely the hacks where money goes missing. If you look at the SEC versus Iraminko, this was a very interesting one. Iraminko and that crew actually went after the Edgar database directly to manipulate research and traders. Ultimately made away with over 4.1 million. And this was a crazy one when you follow up with the SEC actually caught, I think, several of these guys. I know they caught the Capield guy. This is a snapshot from the SEC's complaint. Originally claimed he had made over 832,000. Ultimately, in their lawsuit against him, he had to repay 100,000. So he profited 700,000 off of this hack. And he's Ukrainian, and that's probably about the best you could get out of him. Again, there's been some Russian nationals that have used this. Peter Murmilak, I can't ever say his last name correctly, I'm sure, stole over $1 million from a pretty well-known firm. He was sentenced to 30 months. And then there's also the hack that might not directly affect your clients. You know, if you remember, was it? I can't remember when it was. Might have been towards, I'm drawing a blank there, maybe around 2000 into 2012, beginning of 2013 or some, the fake AP press release that Obama had been hurt in an explosion and caused the stock market to crash. You know, what you probably didn't see was that the hacker, you know, before doing that hack was going really short right here with a bunch of covers in place right down here as the market collapsed through that. And that's a very quick, almost riskless profit to have in place. But, you know, that's how it happens. And ultimately money goes missing. Ransomware is also the big one that we are seeing a lot of right now. Ultimately, if you think in terms of the hacker, it makes the most sense. Let's say I'm a malicious hacker. I phished an employee. Let's say I phished one of your traders and I now have access to the trading platform. I have a couple options. I can start stealing money and draw the attention of the FBI and the Secret Service and, all these others that you definitely don't want tracking you down. Or I can put some ransomware on your network and try to get, a quick $5,000 to $10,000 out of you. And the FBI is never going to investigate because they got too much on their hands. The local police don't know what to do. And it's almost impossible to track back. And even if you do, there's probably not a whole lot you're going to be able to do to get your money back from, a foreign national, especially if they're in a non-cooperative country. On top of that, we just had the Treasury release information, that they're going to start looking into businesses that pay ransomware. So, it would be interesting to see how this plays out. But ransomware is one of those big ones that we really need to be testing for right now, because when it happens, it's devastating. Some people just burn their IT system down and start over. Others pay the ransom. Others, pray that the attacker wasn't able to pivot into their clouds and that sort of thing. So it's never a good situation. It's never a cheap situation. There's no way you're getting out of a ransomware attack for under $100,000 probably, and keeping your IT and system in place and that sort of thing. So I like to end with just talking a little bit about the cybersecurity compliance documents. And so one thing I will send you a link to at the end is this document, which is basically what is this? All right, which is basically a paste dump of different cybersecurity or IT related requests that my clients have received from the SEC or state boards. This is a great document to go through and kind of triangulate where you are in your cybersecurity compliance program. Do you have the correct documentation? The reason I really like this document is because when you read the cybersecurity releases from the SEC, like, it's the same rehashed garbage over and over. It's almost like they copy and paste it, and it really doesn't give you a lot of insight into what's expected of you and what you should be doing. Whereas if you go and you read these, and these are actually copied and pasted off of the document exam request lists that are sent to firms, this is a great way to go, okay, if I receive this request, could I produce this particular documentation? And ultimately, that documentation comes down to the IT asset checklist and inventory, which you can either use that FINRA spreadsheet or use ZenMap, which I demonstrated. The documentation of periodic cybersecurity risk assessment and vulnerability scans. When we're producing that documentation for our clients, we use Nessus. I know there's some other automated scanners out there that you can use. It just have something. Like, you've got to be doing that. This is often one of the big points we see firms failing on. And again, I think it's just a breakdown in communication where the SEC doesn't clearly state in their public releases, what's expected. There's the Cybersecurity Policies and Procedures Manual. If you don't have a copy of this, let me know. I'll actually send you a template that you can use to customize for your firm free of charge, and you guys can use this. So I like to, whether you have a separate document or you keep it in one, I like to have a Cybersecurity Policies and Procedures Manual, and I also like to have an Employee IT Policies Manual. The IT Policies Manual I have when I was in the CCO role, and I recommend for my clients, I have employees sign off on it once a year that they received a copy, and I usually tie that into my annual cybersecurity compliance review. But ultimately, this is going to cover things like, don't bring in outside USB drives, don't click on links, trying to help a Nigerian prince, all the basic stuff. But you need to be giving them these policies and making sure that they're signing off, that they're reading it. I think there's an information security task list. What most of my clients do is they'll take that main domain map and they'll take that internal domain map and they'll just attack a task list to that, so that they say, okay, if we know we're running a WordPress web server, once a month, I'm going to log in and make sure that there are no WordPress patches that need to be updated or installed. Kind of same thing too. Maybe once a quarter, you're going around and making sure that all Windows systems are updated and patched, whatever. Have a task list of when you need to do that. If you don't have a task list template, again, reach out to me. I'll send you one. But just something that helps you not only organize internally for yourself, but show the SEC that, yes, hey, look, we know that once a quarter we're going in and verifying all of these different things. Identity theft, phishing, and imitation red flags documentation, which this came out with regulation SID. These are good things to have. Mostly, all the stuff I give my clients is pretty templated stuff. I know there's a ton of templates out there, but if you don't already have one, again, let me know. I'll send you one. But this is basically a document you give your employees and says, hey, look, this is what you look for in phishing. This is what you look for when identity theft is going on. And these are the red flags that you should look for in your daily work, whether it's cashiering or whatever the case may be. You need a cybersecurity incident response plan. I see this requested a lot. I don't care if this is a separate document. A lot of firms have separate documents that they keep for cybersecurity, and I've seen firms roll it into their business continuity planning as well. I've seen both PATs go through examinations and come out, clean on the other side. So I don't think it really matters as long as you have the documentation somewhere. And of course, you got to do your documentation of an annual employee training. Generally, that should include some phishing training. That should include some, just basic hygiene, password hygiene training, going through how to use IT systems, what not to do with them, a good 20-minute session. And then, of course, because everything we do, if we don't document it, it didn't happen, make sure that the documentation, you have, something signed by the employee that they went through their annual training. So those 7 documents are really kind of the core of the cybersecurity compliance documents that I do for my clients and that we see mostly requested during the examinations. Again, my job is to make sure that these documents are tight during the examination, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. So if you kind of use this as a checklist for your firm, it should put you in pretty solid ground as well. And that's it, guys. That's all I have for today. I hope you found that interesting or insightful. The whole idea is I want to show you what goes on the back end of a cyber attack. I think it's very confusing for a lot of people how their firm may be vulnerable, if it's vulnerable, what systems to use, that sort of thing. So there's that part of it, right? Making sure data is secure, and there's also the part of making sure that you can prove that you are running a secure network and actually testing it in the case of an audit. So, again, it's not fun work for a lot of you guys. I know that, but, being in a regulated industry, I hope this does give you a little more insight into the threats that you're facing and of course, a little more insight into how to protect it. So, again, guys, I appreciate your time so much today. Thank you very much for coming out. If you have any questions or would like any templates, please feel free to let me know. I will send out a link to this list so that you guys can go through it, all the documentation that's been requested, and then give me a couple days here, and I'll also send around a recording of this webinar if that's something that you want to jump into and rewatch. So again, guys, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and hope it's beautiful weather where you are. Thanks a lot.